Hello, everyone. Hope everybody is doing good today. My name is Eric LaRose. I am a lead content producer here at the VX Group. And welcome to Mining Your Sales Data for Gold, presented by the VX Group. A little background about this. A few months ago, we recorded a pilot episode for our podcast, Problems We're Solving. And we talked a little about the need to create an ideal customer profile. Listening to the finished podcast, though, we realized that while listeners would walk away with an idea of what an ideal customer profile is, we didn't exactly provide an easy, concise way of how businesses could develop one. Hence the reason why we are here today. Now, before we get started, this is a discussion, and you are invited to ask questions using the Q&A button. If you click it and submit your question, we'll get to as many of them as we can at the end of today's webinar. I understand that some people like to use the chat button, which we'll also be monitoring, but if you could use the Q&A button, that would be greatly appreciated. And to lead today's discussion, please allow me to introduce Eric Zaromsky. He's the president of the VX Group. Eric is a 20-year sales and marketing veteran, business owner, and pilot of small, not so fast airplanes. He started the VX Group a couple of years ago to help support his true passion for helping businesses grow. Eric, welcome, and take it away.
Well, thanks, Eric. There's plenty of Erics here on the webinar today, so I'll try and keep them all straight. But appreciate everybody taking some time to spend some time with us today. I'll learn a little bit. See a number of names that I know and people I know well, and a few new ones. So to all of you, welcome. As Eric said, this is kind of the offshoot of a podcast series that we started a while back, and talking about ideal customer profiles, and we wanted to extend that effort a little bit further. So we're going to dive right in. We'll expect to spend 20 minutes or so just kind of sharing some thoughts and ideas, and then we'll have some time for a Q&A at the end, so hopefully you can stick through it all. And our goal is to be in and out of here in 40 minutes or so at the most. So if you've got questions, as Eric said, there's a Q&A button you can use to ask questions. You can also use the chat, which he's keeping an eye on for us. So we're going to get started by getting you guys involved a little bit, and kind of start with a little game that I've called Have You Said or Heard This? So you should be seeing a little poll up on your screen that has 4 or 5 statements on it, and if you guys could answer as honestly as you can whether or not you've heard these statements either uttered by a coworker or said by yourself. So you've got yes, no, and I plead the fifth, and really if you plead the fifth, we're just going to call you guilty. So is everybody up? We're starting to see a couple of answers in here. So we'll give that a few minutes, or a minute or so to get your responses in there, and then I'll share that with you, and we can talk about a little bit. I'll give another 10 seconds or so, and then we'll move forward. All right, so I'm going to share the results with you. Looks like 60% of us have either uttered the phrase or heard the phrase, every customer is a good customer. Even a little bit more of us felt that small customers fill in capacity when we're not busy. So they've either said it or heard it. Back to 60%, the idea that small customers will grow to be big customers someday. And then the number 4, the idea we can't say no because they will go to our competitors. Someone who said, I plead the fifth, thank you for your honesty, but you know what that means. And then the last one, which is often one of the most painful ones, is we'll make it up on the next job. Too many times the next job never comes, or if you remind them of that, oftentimes they'll say, we'll make it up on the next job. So a little bit of insight in there. So we'll pull away. So if you look at those statements, in fact, I forgot the last one, the idea of we'll make it up on the next job. The challenge with these is that they've all been said, and in our experience, really, they're all fiction. The reality is that bad customers can suck the life out of a business. Most customers don't know who their ideal customers are, and if they do, they don't know how to focus on making sure that they're treated like ideal customers. And the third one is really challenging in business, in that many leaders have a fear of the word no. In both business and in life, saying no to people, especially if you're a strong Midwesterner like many of us are, we're all about saying yes to people, whether it's at work or at home, and no can sometimes be a hard one. But the reality is that there are situations in business where we've got to say no if we're going to be able to do the things that we want to do. So shifting forward, I'm going to talk a little bit about a couple of things, starting with the Pareto principle. I'm guessing that many of the people on this call are aware of this concept. So it was started by Vilfredo Pareto back in 1906. Was talking about the idea that 80% of the land in Italy was owned by 20% of the population. That got translated into this idea that roughly 80% of the effects of an action come from 20% of the causes, which in business has largely been translated to 80% of sales come from 20% of clients. And I don't know if you've had the opportunity to test this with your business, but it's one of the first things we do when we work with a new VX Group client, because it's very insightful and tells us a lot about what's going on within a new business that we start working with. We've got an analysis tool that we use, really just a fairly simple Excel spreadsheet, although it gets a little complicated when you really start to dig in and do the analysis. That, let me see if I can I'm going to get a little flashlight here. Where are you? There you are. That really starts across the top with a listing of our customers, how they would rank from a revenue perspective, what their total sales are, what's a running sum of their sales, and then calculating, what percentage of revenue do those customers represent. And I just threw some kind of fake data in here because I didn't want to share specific customer information. But then we also look at customer concentration. How much of a company's business does a single customer or a group of customers represent? Down in this orange and blue box is a real life situation, just to give you a feel for how I've seen this play out in reality. With this particular customer, they had 63 customers that they were doing business with. It turned out that 14 of them, or 22.2% of the customers, represented 79.92% of the revenue. So pretty spot on. Top 14 customers represented $11.5 million in revenue. The remaining 49 represented $2 million. You get to see some information on average sales for the top 14 at $831,000. The average sales for the remaining 49 was about $60,000. So that's a 14 times ratio with their top 14 customers versus the remaining 49 or 50 customers. So you start to see some pretty significant insights into what's going on in business when you start to look at it from this perspective. I picked this one because it almost exactly represented the Pareto principle and the concepts around it. I've seen much more significant skewing. We have several companies that we work with that have thousands of customers, and we're finding that it may be as little as 10% of those thousands of customers representing 80% of their revenue. We'll see everything from as low as 5 to 7%, on up to 25%. I've never seen anybody test out against this principle at higher than 25%. So it's an axiom started in the early 1900s that continues to be just remarkably true. Every time I do it on a new client, it just kind of boggles my mind that it's as accurate as it is. So you talk about somebody who is a visionary. Apparently, Mr. Pareto had those characteristics in his DNA. So when you start to look at some of this data in your own customer lists, how do you, it's good to know, okay, well, it's clear that the bulk of our revenue comes from a small subset of our clients. How do you take that stuff and turn it into action, which I think is the most important thing? At the VX Group, we're all about, for lack of a better term, rolling up our sleeves and getting shit done. It's all about how do we turn what we learn into action. And so as it relates to this session, we really kind of honed in on three things. I'm going to share a little bit on ideal customer profile with you, talk a little bit about what we call a customer value calculator, and then I guess maybe preach a little bit on how to learn to say no to your own team, to potentially customers, to yourself for that matter, as you work through some of your decision-making process. So ideal customer profile. This is, I talked about the Pareto principle being one of the first things we do when we engage with a customer. I would put this one at number one. It's really, really important to understand who your ideal customers are. It feeds both your business development efforts, so you can align your business development organization with the types of customers that you want to do business with and those that are good for your business. Excuse me. It also aligns your internal organization, if used properly and shared with the organization, to help them make decisions. Without some type of ideal customer profile and an understanding of who your best customers are, it makes it very difficult to make sound decisions with an organization. And you end up in a lot of meetings, you end up with CC'd on a lot of emails because people are unsure of the decisions that should be made as it relates to our relationships with our customers. So we work with our clients to develop a visual ideal customer profile. When we're done with a session, it really ends up as a two-sided 8.5 by 14 inch sheet of paper. I know there's a few of our clients on here who have gone out and bought 8.5 by 14 inch folders because we like to use big paper. But it helps, kind of fit everything on to a single two-sided page so that people can use it as a reference when they're making decisions in their organization or deciding what's most important to do or what to do next. So we go through a process of kind of a Q&A on the demographics of our customers. Who do you want to do business with? What do they do? What are they called in the industry? How big are they from a revenue perspective? Are they in the Midwest? Are they national? Are they international? All of those kind of real core basic things that help define an ideal customer for a business. For example, at the VX Group, our ideal customer is really somewhere between $5 million and $75 million in revenue. That's a pretty easy one to kind of hone in on. We also take a dive into some of the more complex and more, I don't want to say obscure, but nuanced characteristics. Talking about what is the company value? what's their culture? What's our culture and how does it compare to their culture? What's our ideal relationship with them? All of those types of questions that we work through in order to build one of these out. And then, really on the backside, honing in on the people. Who are we calling on? Who are the people that care about what it is that we do? What's our value proposition for them? What's going to trigger them and put them in a situation where they need to buy? All of those types of characteristics. So we'll share this ideal customer profile worksheet with those folks who have registered for the webinar. So you can use it with your team, or if you'd like to sit down and talk with us and have us facilitate that process for you, we'd be happy to discuss that. So ideal customer profile, really one of the first steps in focusing both a sales organization and the organization as a whole. There will be times where you may have multiple ideal customer profiles. So you may have ideal customer profiles by industry. You may have an ideal customer in the US and an ideal customer on the international side. So there are there's some different ways that this can be tackled, but going through the process to me is one of the most important things in building a strong growing business. So, after ideal customer profile and kind of diving back into, our own data, the topic here was, mining your data for gold. Another thing that we work through with our clients is something we call the customer value calculator. Again, it's another Excel tool that we use. Basically, again, starting with, company sales data. So you may grab sales data from 2018 if your fiscal year is completed, or 2017 if you're on a calendar year, or in a few weeks you'll be in good shape to do 2018. It's basically, again, going through, pulling your company sales data, dropping it into the tool, and then going through a process of adding information that helps define categories of your customers. So if you see, I'm going to grab my little spotlight again here, which takes me a second. And to walk you through this, you'll see that ultimately we have a customer classification column. There's only A's on this because I've got some parameters set that are gonna set it to that. But the exercise is really to go through and categorize the type of business. Oftentimes we'll use direct, sold through dealer, distributor, depending on what your e-commerce, depending on what your channels are. We like to kind of capture that as we go through this exercise. And then this next column, so the columns that are in green are ones that we address. And this is one of the most important and sometimes the toughest to get after, is this idea of growth potential. So a lot of companies view their customers, essentially through the lens of, excuse me, of what have we sold to them. So their most important customers are the ones that they sell the most to. When the reality is that way down their customer list, down at number 847, they may have a company that they've sold a little bit to that represents enormous growth potential for the business. So it would be a shame to, for example, have Boeing as an ideal customer, sell them $1,000 worth of product or service, and put them down in a D category because they only bought $1,000 worth of material from you. The goal is to say, okay, looking at our current customer base, what's our actual growth potential? And so down below, I've got a little bit of explainer into this idea of revenue potential versus booked revenue. And I've found this to be really challenging for both sales leaders and salespeople to get their heads around. They're very used to the literal numbers and saying, well, I sold $1 million with this company. But they have a really hard time saying, I sold $1 million with this company, but I'm only working in one part of this organization, and they're a global company. And if we really focused energy on them, we could, grow them by 100% or 200% or 300%. So there's this idea of recurring growth potential within customers. Let me see if I can master the art of pulling up an example of this so you can kind of see how it works. Hopefully people are seeing a spreadsheet. Eric or David, if you could give me a nod via chat, that'd be great. This is really the worksheet, and is showing this idea of growth potential. So if company one is a $4 million customer today, and we sit down with our sales team and say, we could grow that company, over a year, over 2 years by another 50%, which would make them a $6 million customer. But you have to take in consideration that's recurring business. So if you take that 4 to 6, and they're a recurring customer, you're adding, $2 million a year onto your revenue. And you did it. You didn't have to go out and find a new customer. You didn't have to go out and add 30 or 40 or 50 new small customers. What you did was really focus the business's energy on growing with customers you're already doing business with that have high revenue potential. As I walk through this, can make a few of these changes. We also consider margin potential. So if in this example, if we set a customer to a low margin, so they're a low margin customer, they're generally going to come back as a B classification. If I set them as medium or high, they're going to be an A customer classification. We also consider account maintenance level, as in, are they easy to work with, or are they a real pain in the butt? We capture that because as we go through this process, there's the potential that we're going to be reassigning accounts to different sales representatives. So we want to consider that as part of, I guess what I would call the load that we might put on an account manager or a sales executive. Then within this tool, you can assign account leads as well. I'm also set it up so that it'll automatically do a search based on what information's in the company field. So if you see a company on your client list, if you've got a deep client list and you don't recognize them, you can do a quick Google search to do that. You'll see this tool is set up to do the top 250. Getting through the first 100 is daunting. So it's not an exercise you're going to do on all of your customers. The goal in most cases would be to do it on your 20% that produce 80% of your revenue. But it's set up to do the top 250 customers. And then there's a set of variables that you can change in order to drive the ranking of your customers. So there's a revenue matrix, that looks at the revenue. There's a lookup table that determines, the idea of high revenue and high margin is an A, high revenue and low margin is a B, and so forth. So those are variables that can be set within this tool itself. And that's also something that if you'd like to have it, we're happy to share it. So we'll slide that out of the way. Hopefully we'll still be on screen here. And so that's really this idea of looking at our customer base, determining which ones are the highest value to our business, classifying them so that we know who our A, B, C, and D customers are, and then starting to take action against that. If we've got an A customer and we haven't been paying attention to them, who's the account lead that's assigned to that? What's our goal? What are we going to do in order to reach that goal? Those are all things that need to happen in order to make this process successful. All right, so moving on to the learning to say no piece. So just some thoughts on learning to say no. Learning to saying no is a hell of a lot easier if you have an ideal customer profile in place. Without that, it leaves everything in the gray. Give you an example. You could have your shipping and receiving department or your production department may prioritize an order for a D customer because your salesperson went to them and said, this D customer is really mad. They need this stuff overnight. And if they don't get it, they're not going to keep working with us. And that D customer may represent, a couple $1,000s a year in revenue for your business. If that order is causing an order for an A customer to not get out the door, it's putting your business at risk because you could have that A customer maybe quietly stewing and you wouldn't know it. And, the next time you turn around, all of a sudden they've taken some or all of your business somewhere else because you've had your sales team and you've had your production team focused on the people that create the most chatter, and they've taken their eye off the ball of what's really important. So saying no and knowing when to say yes is a hell of a lot easier with an ideal customer profile in place. Knowing when to say yes is an art as well. If an ideal customer profile comes in through your website and says they'd like to buy $9.95 worth of product, the business should jump through every hoop they can in order to turn that first inquiry into a sale so that you've now got the opportunity to go out there and grow that business with another ideal customer where you're already quote unquote in their system. The value of being in a company's system is enormous. One of the strategies we talk about with a lot of our clients is, if you've got large corporations as customers, go to their other locations and let them know that you're already quote unquote in their system, because that's such a hard thing for them to get done. They've got, SAP, which I've been told stands for Stop All Progress, or they've got some big procurement process that they can't get through. Setting up new vendors is a real hassle. So if somebody reaches out to them and says, what, we're already selling product to your facility in Minneapolis. Hey, Austin, Texas, we're already in your system. Let's talk about doing some business with you. That's a great way to grow and a great place to say yes. Another strategy, if you want to retain volume, so let's say you've got a really large customer list, but there's still some decent revenue and volume down on the bottom, and that revenue is good margin revenue for you. There's an opportunity to transition some of that volume to e-commerce. And you may ask, well, what does that do for me? What it generally does is take a lot of complexity out of the sales process and puts it onto the buyer. So they go in and they fill in all the information. They place the order, they hit submit, and hopefully you've got a streamlined process internally that allows you to take that order, fulfill it, and get it out the door quickly. So it's one way to take kind of noise out of your internal system, which I haven't really talked about a lot today. But when we see customers that have thousands of customers and their most important customers number in the low hundreds, have generally built a ton of complexity into their internal system. We've done some cost analysis with clients, or they've done it on their own. One client we work with, calculated it cost to get an invoice out the door at $75. So there's a lot of process, a lot of inefficiency, a lot of activity that goes into servicing small customers, that if you manage to back away from those a little bit, it gives you an opportunity to streamline your business and to do things more effectively. The fourth is, and I know some people on this call have used this strategy, so I may have stole it from them, but the idea of transitioning low value, high maintenance customers to your competitors. There's really nothing better than taking somebody who's just causing you so much angst and saying, you know what, it may be better. You may be better served by working with XYZ. And if you can take your high maintenance clients and push them off to your competitors, it'll keep them busy while you're focused on your ideal customers. So just another tactic, another way to kind of move people off. I don't like to use the term, well, we fired customers. It's pretty easy to give them a path. It's not so hard to say to them, you know what, we're just not a good fit for your needs, but here's a couple other companies that maybe you should look at. because those companies are going to continue to be a challenge for them. And as much as you'd like to think they will, they're not going to grow into a $500,000 or $1 million customer. They just don't have the ability to do that. They kind of are what they are once they've established kind of a working trend with you as a business. So as we start to kind of wrap things up here, we started this with, find the gold. So naturally the question is, where is it? In our opinion, it's really in your ideal customers and your ideal prospects. And we talk more about ideal customers, so people you're already doing business with today, than we did prospects. And that'll be a topic of a future webinar, is how do you take an ideal customer profile and apply it to prospecting. But we wanted to start with things that you're most familiar with and the things that are closest to you as business leaders. The goal is in your ideal customers and prospects. You need to know them intimately. If you can't look at your customer list and instantly say this is an ICP fit or not, then you're behind the 8 ball. Knowing it makes life so much easier. You also want to be able to quantify their potential. So if you've got a $1 million customer and their potential is $1.1 million, we certainly want to retain that, and we want to earn that 0.1. But that's not where we're going to go and look for growth. When we've got one where maybe we've done $100,000 with, but their potential is $2 million, that's a place where we really want to focus our energies, because there's a ton of growth potential there as a prospect. The third is to really focus, 80% or more. I'd like to see 85 or 90% of your team's efforts on your ICP customers and prospects. And I use the term team as one that in my mind is really important. You want your team to know who your ideal customer profile is. And I don't just mean your leadership team or your sales team. I want your customer service people to know that. I want your shipping and receiving people to know it. I want your finance people to know it. I want the person who answers the phone to know it, because they're the ones that are interacting with your customers. And if they don't know which ones are the most important, they're going to treat them all the same. And hopefully they're going to treat them well. But treating every customer the same, especially in a business-to-business sales environment and growing a business, is not necessarily the goal. There are some customers in your business that are more important than others, and we need to recognize that and treat those that way. So really using that word team and making sure that your organization is embracing your ideal customer profile is really, really important. The fourth thing is to improve and or change your processes and stop doing things that distract you and your team and distract you from focusing 80+% of your efforts on your ICP customers and prospects. As I say there, that often includes saying no to low value customers. I encourage you and your organization to get comfortable with that. Is there a chance you're going to say no to a customer that turns into $1 million customer for someone else? Possibly. It's highly unlikely. We are all smart business people, and if you use your experience and your instincts and say no, you're going to find out that you're going to win more often than you're going to lose. So just kind of wrapping things up, one thing we can offer is, be happy to run a Pareto analysis and put together some insights based on your sales data as a thank you for joining us. So anyone who's interested in reaching out and sharing some sales information, we're certainly willing to do that for you. If you need an NDA in place, we've got one of those. So that's not a big deal at all. It's a fairly simple thing to set up, but it does get a little tricky sometimes, especially when you try and start to summarize the information based on lots of pages of data for many businesses. So we'd be happy to do that for anybody that wants to take us up on it. I'll send you a follow-up email. We'll have a link to some of the tools that we talked about today in here. There'll also be a recording of the webinar if you want to share it with anybody else. And then that kind of wraps up the presentation part of things, and we can spend a few minutes on Q&A. If anybody's got any questions, they can drop them into the Q&A box, or they can drop them into
chat. Or
yeah, there we go. Thanks, Eric.
You are welcome. You're welcome. Actually, we do have a few of them right off the bat, and one of them is kind of something you talked about at the end. I understand the importance of having an ICP. The question I have is, we have some customers who we like and have been loyal to. They've been loyal to us for years, and we've been loyal to them, and they might not fit into our ICP. What do we do in that situation?
Well, I think you're going to look at, if they don't fit your ICP, are they profitable from a financial perspective? Are they good for the business? Do you have they potentially referred other business to you? Are they difficult to work with? If somebody matches multiple criteria, they're low margin, low volume, difficult to work with, they're just not going to be a good fit for your business. If you like them, they're easy to work with, their orders just flow through the system. They don't, raise a stink if, you say something's going to be there in 5 days and it's there in 6, then, you make a good, smart business decision as it relates to those. I think that's at the end of the day, it's making good, smart business decisions, but also knowing that, we really appreciate your business over the years, but, we've taken our business in another direction, and we're just not set up to service you the way we have in the past. Here's a few recommendations, is a perfect way to quote unquote break up with a customer.
Okay. All right. Another question. So if my 80-20 analysis is more like 90-10 or 95, does that mean my business is in trouble?
It doesn't. Well, I would want to look at the next thing, which would be customer concentration. Mm-hmm. So, if you're running customer concentrations above 30%, and you've got a 10% 80-20 mix, I'd be looking pretty carefully at what's going on in the business, and I'd be implementing some strategies to diversify the portfolio. Any kind of concentration over 30% is, in my mind, that's a big waving red flag that needs to be addressed. If that's not the case, then you could have a 90-10 that's still very healthy, but it should also guide you in some of the other decisions that you make and where you focus your energies.
Okay, so it's like looking up a symptom on Google. It could be something bad, it could be something nothing, and you just have to dive in a little deeper.
Yeah, I guess I never recommend anybody look up a symptom on Google. I think
Dr. Google will steer you wrong.
that's heading down a dangerous road. Call your doctor.
Right, exactly. All right, so we got another one here. It just came in. How would you change the mindset and culture of a business that has done everything for everyone and not prioritized based on an ICP model? Same for the past 20 years.
It's once you start to work with businesses and, really, I've started calling it almost painting a picture with Excel. People paint pictures and draw with pens and brushes and those types of things. I think we've kind of created a methodology where we start to paint a picture, with Excel and with numbers. And when you start to do that with people, it doesn't take long before the light bulb goes off. When you start to talk about ideal customer profile and get them engaged and get them talking about the people that they enjoy working with, the ones that are the most profitable, the ones that are doing new and exciting things, it builds some energy. And then they also really quickly start to say, oh yeah, that customer is really not very good for us. They're kind of a pain in the butt. or why are we chasing, this piece of business, that's, we're one of 5 competitive bids and we know we're just, there to meet some bid requirement. They start to get it pretty quickly. And then, I think that the visual ICP really helps. It's something that you can give to the team. I love it when we go into our clients' offices and they've got them, tacked up to their wall in their office or whatever it may be, because then you know that it's starting to become a frame of reference for them. So, I think that any organization, regardless of how long they have not been focused or had an everything for everybody mentality, it doesn't matter. They can change. Sometimes it takes a little bit longer. Sometimes you'll find people where it's really not possible, and then you may have to make some tough decisions. But I think once you start to get people into the mindset, they start to catch on, and it progresses pretty quickly.
Okay. All right, everybody, we have time for a few more questions. I have 1 or 2 queued up, so if you have any last minute ones, get them in now. Let's see. How much time here's another one. How much time does it take to do an 80-20 analysis? Is there like a set amount of time or?
No, it can be done. It can be done pretty quickly. Like I said, we've got some tools to do it. I think, getting the numbers into the spreadsheet is a pretty quick process. I think the biggest challenge we have with some of our clients is how clean is their customer data. We'll often find, situations where they may ship to a number of different locations, but it's really all the same company. So there's some effort that may need to be done to kind of clean that up and organize that so that the dollars kind of roll up to a parent company. So that type of work. So how clean the data is impacts the amount of time. What does take some time is to start to really dig into it and come up with some actionable insights and figuring out what is it that we want to do. I will say the value calculator, and I think one of my clients that we just did this with a few days ago is on the phone. The value calculator can be pretty arduous. You really got to dig in. You got to look at every your top 100 or 200 customers. You've got to make some decisions, and that's one that takes a little bit more time, but is also probably one of the most valuable.
Okay, all right. And actually, you touched on this other question that we have here a little bit. What if you don't have quote unquote accurate sales data? And I'm guessing that means it's not well organized or it doesn't go back far enough. What do you do in that situation?
Well, that's kind of talk to that. That's kind of that cleanup process. Our goal would be to work with the client to figure out a way to whatever changes we need to make in order to clean up the data, kind of make sure that those get rolled back into their ERP platform or their accounting platform, so that the next time that you want to do an assessment or evaluation of their data, it's clean and ready to go. So yeah, that's probably one of the biggest challenges, is just getting the data into a form where you can trust that it's going to give you a good insight.
Okay. All right. Super. So looking here, we have no more open questions. So that brings us to the end, everyone. As Eric said, we'll be sending out a follow-up email. And we will be getting that out in the next day or so. In it, you'll have a link to this webcast that you can share, as well as a link to some documentation. Thank you again. Eric, do you have any final words?
No, just thank you to those for attending. I'd welcome any feedback. Phone numbers and email are on the bottom of the screen right now. I think many of you probably have access to it. So would love to hear what you think about both today's session. And if you've got any other topics that you think would be ones that would be good to cover, either in a podcast form or webinar form, we'd welcome those as well.
Yes, definitely. And we will be doing this again, hopefully in January, and we'll send you all information about that as soon as possible. All right. Everybody have a great day. Hope this was informative. Take care and have a happy and safe holiday season.
Thanks, Eric.
Bye, everybody.